Yeah, hi, Johanna, and thanks a lot for agreeing to participate in this interviewing series.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Congratulations to accepting the position at the University of Notre Dame. So when will you actually take up your new position?
I'm actually starting, so the classes start on 23rd of August, but I'll be moving there August 2nd. That's sort of, but the class actually, so during August and right now I'm actually preparing the classes and sort of preparing as well the topics of research that I'll be taking on. But formally it's on August.
I see. So I guess you're quite busy already.
Yes, exactly. I'm approaching the very busy time, so I'm preparing for it.
And you also just actually finished finished defending your PhD, right? So also
Yes.
congratulations on that.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, that's correct. I defended in about 10 days ago. And right now I'm doing the minor revisions to submit the final work. So I'm also doing that.
So how did you actually reconcile this? Did you have any time at all to work on your thesis, like while applying and interviewing for jobs and making a decision?
Yeah, so that was difficult because finding a job is also a job, kind of. So,
Right.
and then everything sort of started last year. That's when all the positions start to kind of show up on the CRA jobs database. And so I took a lot of time just writing these research statements, teaching statements, diversity statements as well. Doing the conciliation between doing my research and doing what I was preparing to my interviews and so on was difficult. So I think there were maybe at least 2 weeks during the job talk period that I did not do any research. That was basically the first 2 weeks of March. I could not do much in terms of research, exactly because I was doing job talks and I had to be full time on that task. So yeah, it was challenging. That's why. So initially, my plan was to defend end of May, but then that got carried over to end of June, precisely for that reason, because I got delayed on working on things.
And can you also shortly introduce yourself? Like, what did you do before now becoming a fresh assistant professor?
Yes, so I've been a PhD student at Rochester Institute of Technology. It's in Rochester, New York, United States. My main research area is actually software engineering. So I work at the intersection of software engineering and software security. So I looked at how bad design decisions can lead to vulnerabilities, so issues by design or issues related to the implementation of those design decisions as well. And also working on developing a technique for finding untrusted object deserialization. This is sort of my dissertation in a nutshell. So that's from where I come from before I'm going to join as University of Notre Dame as a professor, as an assistant professor.
And before your PhD?
Before a PhD, I've done my master's in software engineering as well at RIT. And prior to that, my undergrad was in computer engineering. And I've done that in Brazil in the university called Federal University of Sergipe. It's the state school in the hometown where I was. So that's from where I came from.
You said that you will already start teaching classes. So is also teaching relief included in your package, or did you ask for this?
So I have not asked for teaching release because the teaching load did seem reasonable. So the teaching load is 1-1, so 2 courses a year, with the possibility to buy out through research grants. And that's sort of to everyone that is on tenure track, that's the teaching load pre-tenure and after tenure. So for that reason, I did not try to get any teaching release. So I'm teaching one course now, and then the next course is going to be one course that I'm going to design from scratch. Because right now I'm teaching one core course. So I'm using some materials from faculty that taught last semester. So that's at least I have a starting point.
I see. So can you tell us a bit about the University of Notre Dame?
Yes, so University of Notre Dame is a private school. It's classified by the Carnegie Mellon classification as R1, so very high research activity. I'm joining the computer science and engineering department. So they associated with that department, it's a computer science program and computer engineering both bachelor's program. And they also have a PhD in computer science and engineering. So that's the students I will be advising will be getting a PhD on that. So that's sort of a little bit about the university.
Have you actually ever physically visited the university and the place?
Yes, so after my job talk, maybe 3 weeks after that, I did visit the university. That was maybe early April. So I went there, I saw the department, I looked a little bit at the offices as well. I met a few faculty, socially distanced, of course. And then I only spent basically 2 days there. So one day I visited the school, the other day I took the chance to look at the city to find places to rent so for fall. So yeah, so that I did got the chance to actually see the university. So
That was basically a second visit, right?
that was well, because my first visit was virtual, right? I've done the job talk virtually. So that was my first in-person visit,
I see.
right? That's what I meant.
Can you describe the process and timeline of the whole interviewing season? And perhaps also how you felt during the individual stages of the process?
Okay, so I think in terms of timeline, I got my first phone interview, I think December last year. That's because I started my applications maybe November. That's I think when I start putting in my first package. So I got my first interview, a phone interview. I did not get the job talk. Then I've done a few more interviews January after the winter break. Also, 2 phone interviews, did not got the job talk. And then at some point I did more phone interviews and then I got a job talk. So that was pretty much the 2 weeks of beginning 2 weeks of March. And all of them were virtual. So that gave me an advantage in the sense that I could schedule 2 job talks in the same week. So that was good. So I did not have to travel, and that helped a little bit. So and then I've done, so for instance, I've done my first job talk, I think last day of February, so maybe February 29 or something. So that was on a Friday. And then on Monday, the following, so Friday, and then the next Monday, I received the offer from that school, but that happened to be the first school that I interviewed. So I asked them a little bit of time so that I could do at least 2 more job talks to sort of get a sense of if I would get an offer or not. So that was sort of the timeline. So everything kind of happened on March. I had a very slow start in the sense that I did not get as many phone interviews. I did not got job talks in the beginning, and everything just sort of happening on March. So March is where I start to have job talking invitations as well that I declined because by then I had an offer already. So I did not make any sense for me to do a job talk if I knew that I was going to Notre Dame. So there were a few job talks that I canceled and also phone interviews as well that I canceled. That was sort of the timeline. And then all the offers pretty much came on March, and they did not all came at the same time. So meaning that I could not just sort of make them to have the same deadline and then choose. I have to kind of choose as I go. I did like ask for extensions here and there, but I could not ask for, say, 1 month of extension. That would be too much. So that was sort of what happened.
That sounds like a very busy period.
Yeah, so March was, which is good. It's a good problem to have. It's good to be busy in that way for these job talks and offers and negotiation. That's good.
Yeah, that's true.
And yeah, I cannot complain at all.
Yeah, I would say let's chat a bit about the preparation phase in more detail. So when did you decide to go on the job market?
When exactly? Well, I knew for sure I'll be graduating right now in 2021. So initially it was spring, but now I ended up graduating early summer, June. So with that being said, so I knew that I would be on this job market 2021. And so I knew that, well, the jobs come, my advisor told me, well, usually the job starts to be advertised around October, November. So you should have your package ready around that time, so that as soon as you see your job advertising, you submit your materials. So maybe I start my preparation maybe September, October. I think I had a first draft of at least my research and teaching statement, and I kept improving on that as I submitted with my materials and tailoring as well, because some schools, they might ask for research statement and teaching, others might ask all together. And also some schools might ask for diversity statements, others do not. So I needed to tailor as well. And also the cover letter. So that's sort of my timeline to prepare for it. I wish I had started earlier. So I really wish I had started beginning of summer, but I did not. I sort of like, oh no, that is time. In last minute, I was rushing doing that. But
Yeah, I
But
guess
that's what I.
procrastination is always an enemy.
Yes, I guess, yeah, yeah. Time management is an issue. It's just because, well, at the same time, like, well, I have to do my research, and because research has some deadlines here and there, and then since I knew, well, but the jobs will come on October, so I still have some time, but I need to cover this deadline now, and that's sort of what happened. But turned out okay in the end. But I would recommend if anyone is starting round, start as early as possible, at least drafting the documents.
That's good advice. And at this time, did you decide to only apply for positions in academia or also, for example, industrial research positions?
I mostly applied to academia, mostly applied for assistant professors, tenure track. I think I maybe applied to 2, 3 industry positions. And one of the positions was actually in Brazil, but in the end, I ended up choosing academia.
When deciding for what kind of institutions to apply, so what were the criteria that you choose? For example, ranking or geographical location or so some other factors?
Yeah, so in terms of criteria, I mostly applied to positions in United States and in Canada. But even Canada, I think maybe very few schools. I was mostly focused on the United States. And then in terms of, I was not, ranking was not a criteria when I was applying. That was more when I was deciding, so to speak. So I basically applied to anything that my criteria was basically, it's a tenure track position. And and the position is for assistant professors, right? Because I'm a junior, I'm on my early career. So that was sort of my criteria. I think there were very few positions advertised that were tenure track, and I did not apply just because the location specifically was in a city that I was not willing to go. So I knew, well, if I'm not willing to go, then it's not worth it for me to apply if I'm not really going there. So that was pretty much it. So that was my filtering: tenure track and assistant professor.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
And for people applying, like, what would your suggestion be on how many institutions to apply for?
So the advice I've received is that just to apply to everything that matches whatever criteria you have. And that's basically what I did. I applied to everything. So I think in the end, I applied maybe to 40 institutions in total. So that includes academia and industry. Because initially I was really, I was selecting, I was kind of basically, okay, I want to apply to 5 institutions at most, because I thought, well, I don't want to put a burden on my reference letters to be all the time submitting a bunch of letters. But then the advice I received, no, you should apply to everything because it's a very competitive market, and you might have these 5 top schools that you really want to go, but does not necessarily mean you would get the position because other people also want to go to those institutions. And then my concern about the reference letters was clarified in the sense that, well, not all the schools ask for reference letters upfront, so only after you're shortlisted. So that means that even if I submit to 40 schools, not all 40 schools will ask for a letter. And then that's my advisor told me, well, but the issue about the letter, what takes the most time is writing it. But once you have it written, submitting is just clicking a button. So that's why I figured, okay, I'll apply to whatever matches my criteria, and then hopefully my reference letters will not be upset about it. But I think they were fine with that, because I could see that I received the email saying, hey, this person submitted the letter and everything. So
also very relatable. So I was also worried about this, and actually one of the letter writers told me that writing the letter is what takes the most effort, and then like slightly tailoring it and submitting it is then not much effort anymore.
Yes, exactly. And I pretty much I asked all of them that it was fun for them to write just a general letter in general, because since I would be applying for a faculty position, so they could write in terms of research, teaching broadly, so they did not have to tailor to University A or B, precisely because I did not want to add more work to them, that I was trying to be mindful of that.
So speaking of tailoring, did you, for example, also tailor the cover letter to the specific institution, or did you submit generic ones?
That's a good question. So I did had a sort of baseline cover letter, because there are certain things I would keep there. So for instance, my background, my research, and then I had one paragraph that I would touch upon a little bit about teaching. So that part I would tailor to what classes in that institution I could teach or I could design. So I would have a paragraph on that that is tailored. The paragraph that mentioned about my research, I would tailor a little bit. So for instance, if the position was for software engineering or had software engineering as one of the priority areas, then I would sell myself as a software engineering person. But some other institutions, they were looking for security people. So I would sell myself a little bit more as a security person rather than software engineering. And software engineering would be sort of a second. So I did tailor that as well on how I would kind of present my research. And one paragraph as well, which is about mentioning people that I could collaborate with in the department, how I could, what kind of research projects I'll bring to the department. So that part as well, I also would tailor, saying, for instance, institution A might have a center for cybersecurity or something like that. Then I would mention I'll be a good fit for that center because my research is on security. So that's where I would be tailoring. But definitely I started from a baseline.
How long did it take to prepare all these different kind of materials?
That's a good question. I think I took 1 month, but it's 1 month in the sense that it was not like I was working every day on that, right? So 1 month in the sense that while I was doing other stuff, I would allocate a little bit of time to work on my CV, my statements, and so on. So I don't know exactly how many hours. If I never tracked that, but it took me at least 1 month to sort of prepare, considering that during that 1 month I was also doing other stuff, my research and so on.
So how did you approach your letter writers, and how did you initially meet them?
So in terms of approaching, I approached them all via email. So I had 3 reference letters. One was my advisor, another one was a colleague. So we wrote the paper together. And the other one was a colleague from the community in software engineering. So I approached them via email and I say, hi, nice talking to you. I hope everything is well. And then I mentioned, well, I'm going to the job market. Would you agree to be my reference letter? So that was the contact. And as I mentioned, so one was a colleague that I had collaborated before on a paper. So I had met him before on conferences and when we collaborated on that paper. And then the second faculty, he's also a faculty in Canada. I've met him when he came to do a visit at RIT. So he did an invited talk. So I met him there, and I also met him virtually maybe 3 months, actually, I think around June last year, virtually, of course, on a conference. And then once I emailed him was maybe November, I guess, or no, September, October. So I kind of started email saying, hey, it was nice chatting with you during this conference. I was wondering if you could write a letter to me. So that was my approach. So it was virtual because, well, COVID, but I knew the faculty before I had interactions with them.
How did you structure your job talk?
That's a good question. So I think my job talk was, the first slide was basically one Venn diagram showing the areas of research. So I had the title software engineering, and then I would have software architecture design, software security. There was another one was program analysis and verification, and then software traceability. So that just to give an overview of things I have done in the past 5 years. At least I heard that it is a good strategy to kind of help them see which bucket you belong to. So I start with that slide, and then I would say, well, my job talk, I'll focus on these areas in here. And then I presented a little bit about my research, so on the main areas that I chose. And basically I structured in a way, I think I presented pretty much 3 papers. I structured paper 1, results, paper 2, results. And then in the end, I had touched a little bit on future work to kind of show that I already have some ideas on what I'm planning to do next and from where I'm planning to get funding. So I'll touch a little bit on that. I would also mention briefly any faculty that I would think would be have some good match for collaboration as well in the department. And then after that, I would basically then wrap up with a conclusion. So that was sort of my organization. So my research areas, then my research, future work, and then conclusion. That was broadly what I've done.
I see. And what was the rough length of the job talk?
I think around 40 minutes. I think that's how much, I think I planned for 40, 45 minutes. Because I remember at least all the slots were an hour in the duration.
Mhm.
And then I think it was 15 minutes for Q&A. So I planned myself for 40, 45 minutes. I practiced that in advance to make sure that I would finish within that range.
Yeah, we talked now quite a bit about preparations. So I would say let's continue talking about interviewing itself. And yeah, the first question is, what was the structure of the visit at the University of Notre Dame like?
So that one was, well, it was virtually, of course. So that was pretty much 1 day and a half. So I think I've done maybe Wednesday and Thursday or Thursday and Friday. I don't quite remember. Let's assume it was Thursday and Friday. So Thursday started around 1 p.m. I think, so early afternoon. So 1 p.m. maybe. So the first thing I've done was a meeting with the chair of the department. So he walked over, um, we have walked over basically about the department, the history of the department, how many students they have, programs, and so on. Then after that, I think maybe I met two more faculty, one-on-one fashion. And then I had my job talk. Then after that, I think I met more faculty, and that was the end for the first day. And then on the second day was a full day visit, and basically that was one-on-one visits, one-on-one meetings, either one-on-one or myself and three other faculty in at the same time slot. So that was sort of the structure of the visit. And that was pretty much standard for the other job talks as well, except that I think some of the visits was just 1 day, so from 8 to 5 or 6, depending on the time zone. But that was basically the structure.
How did these meetings work where you were interviewed by three faculty members at once?
I'll backtrack a little bit. So before I had the visit, I had the phone interview, which was not through phone, was through Zoom. So that interview is mostly them asking questions to basically kind of filter out which ones they want to bring for the visit. So in that one, which was much before, I think 1 week and a half before my visit, they asked questions about my research, funding, and they actually asked me to do I think a 3-slide or 3-minute slides about basically my research, my future work, and opportunities for collaboration, I think. So that was the phone interview. And then for the visit, then the one was kind of easy, was more sort of a conversation. So they would openly ask, oh, what is your research, and so on. And I would ask them about the research. Sometimes I knew the fact there was a faculty working on natural language processing, and I asked him some questions about some techniques that I could use to my work. So I asked him, well, I have this problem, how should I solve it? What is the best algorithms for that issue? But yes, when it's more than one faculty, it might be a little bit challenging, but it felt more like a conversation rather than an interview, which is good. And I would also ask questions, for instance, if there is a junior faculty, I would ask questions about how is the tenure process. I would ask questions more related to the tenure process, how much support the faculty have. So I'll tailor a little bit my questions based on the rank of the professor. If there's assistant, I'll ask more about the tenure. If there's associate professor, I'll ask tenure, but more from the perspective, what do you expect from a junior faculty? Things like that.
I see.
Yeah, so that was pretty much the workflow of things.
And when you received questions, for example, in the phone interviews about funding, so what were typical questions? For example, what will your career award be on?
Yeah, so I think it was more broadly in terms of which agencies I would look for money. So I mentioned National Science Foundation and also DARPA, DOE, DOD, agencies that they want to do security work. They have not asked specifically what my career award would be, but more broadly, what topics I would bring on my grant proposal and what agencies I would look for to submit the proposal.
How did you schedule the interviews? For example, did you schedule your most important interview more towards the middle or at the beginning or more towards the end? What was your strategy there?
Yes, I tried to do that. So I think I received my first invitation to do a job talk maybe early February or late January, I think. So I tried to push that a little bit as late as possible. So that's why I pushed the end of February. And then during the February month, that's when I've done my more fun interviews. That's when I start to schedule where each thing should go. What did definitely happen is that for Notre Dame specifically, I think I've done the phone interview. I know the same day they invited me for the job talk. And in that case specifically, what happened is I did had a job talk on the week from March 1st, I think, to March 5th. So I did had job talks planned of that, but I really wanted Notre Dame. And then most of my job talks were pretty much from February 26th, I think, to March 15th. So I did not want to push too late because I was afraid I would receive an offer and I would not have the chance to do the job talk at Notre Dame. So what I did is I canceled one of the job talks that I had on that week. So I canceled that and then I put Notre Dame on that slot, basically.
I see.
Because basically the school I had a job talk there. It was sort of, I knew that among the options I had, more likely that would not be my top priority. And Notre Dame would definitely be more prior. I had more preference over Notre Dame, so I did that. And since it was more than 1 week prior, it was still reasonable for me to kind of cancel and give them time to put someone else on that slot.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And if you compare the first interview that you did with one of the later ones, so are there any things that you could improve or that you learned, let's say, from your first interviews that you can then apply?
Oh, yes, definitely. I think the first issue is mostly being nervous. That's because once you're nervous, then you don't think well, even as much as you have prepared, you forget what you need to say. And it's hard because even if you practice a lot, being nervous is something that at least to me, I only could only get over it by actually doing it. So that's why the first phone interviews were bad because I was not still experienced enough on phone interviews. But I think I definitely improved mainly because at some point it was more automatic. I was not nervous anymore. It just felt more like a conversation. So the conversation kind of flew more naturally. Another thing I've done is maybe I prepared more for the questions. So in terms of questions, I did look at the questions that were listed in your website. So I dumped all of them on Microsoft Word, and then I organized them per topic. So this is research, this is teaching, this is diversity questions, funding questions. And I would select some of them that I think I need more preparations than others. And I've made the mistake of overlooking the research ones, right? Because I felt, well, I think I'm confident enough to talk about my own research. What I would have more difficulty is thinking about, well, what classes do you want to teach? What do you want to design? That needs more thinking in advance because I cannot just on the fly come up with a course and topics. But that was a mistake because I think it's very good that you have your research speech well prepared so that when you actually are asked that question, you can do that. Because I think that's one mistake I've made for one of my phone interviews, which went by really quickly. I think the interview was supposed to be a half an hour phone interview, and that finished in maybe 10 minutes, precisely because I did my research speech I don't know, 10 seconds or something. I was not well prepared. So that was one mistake I've done, was to not prepare my research speech because I thought I had it already and I didn't. So that's, if I went back on time and I could change that, I would change that, definitely. But in terms of, and now going back to your question, I think definitely I did improve over time as I've done more phone interviews. And as I mentioned before, precisely because I was getting less and less nervous as I was getting the interviews.
Also a question in this direction. So besides these questions that you didn't expect at the beginning, Were there any kind of bigger surprises, questions that you didn't anticipate and that still stuck with you?
I think all questions were pretty much along with the lines that you had on your website and along the lines that I've seen on a book. The book is called The Professor Is In. Um, but I think there was one question that was just worded differently than I was expected, but it was touching upon diversity. So the question was along the lines of, if there was an hypothetical scenario that there is a student with a different background than I, so it's a different ethnicity, different religion, a different country of origin, and that student is struggling in my class, how would I go about helping that student? So it was a question relating teaching and diversity, but so the way it was worded was unexpected because I was not expecting that to have in a hypothetical scenario, but it still was still along the lines of teaching and diversity. So that was not exactly too difficult to answer. It was just the way it was framed was unexpected, basically.
I see. Yeah, I guess I would also have to think for a while on how to best answer this question.
Yes.
And how did you handle the question? Do you have any questions?
Oh yes. I actually, for every interview I did have questions. So I would have that's a good thing about phone Zoom interviews, is that I would have Microsoft Word pulled up a little bit so I could look at the notes without being so obvious. So I always had at least 3 questions that I would ask to them prepared in advance. Most of the questions were kind of cliche, sort of, for instance, what is the teaching load, pre-tenure, post-tenure? What is the process to hire PhD students, things like that. Then I would make some questions tailored to the university, to the department. So for instance, there was one school that they had a program that faculty could apply, junior faculty could apply, to get mentors from another university. So they could sponsor a visit from that mentor to the university you're staying, and also to the university that the mentor is as well. So I also asked the question about that program specifically. So that was just for that school.
Mhm.
So I usually would have at least 3 questions for the phone interview that I could ask them. And for the job talk, I would also have that. So I would have like a bigger list of questions, and I'll sort of organize per type of people I want to be interacting with. So some questions that is most appropriate for the chair of the department, other questions for the dean, other questions for junior faculty, other for more senior faculty, other for staff members. Because for instance, for some of the visits, I did meet the person who handles the research infrastructure, so the servers and all of that. So questions that I would ask that person is not research oriented, would be more, how do I use the infrastructure? What is the protocol? Things like that. Or what kind of machines do you have? I have these requirements. Can you fulfill those? So I would have this huge spreadsheet of questions, and I would kind of organize the per type of person so that I would have prepared in advance. And then for each job visit, then I would pick the questions and put on each slot. So I would have my schedule with the names of the people I would be interacting with, and then I would have the questions under those time slots. So that's sort of how I prepared for the, do you have any questions?
I see. Yeah, I guess
And
we used a very
yeah.
similar strategy there.
Yes, and I kept that document opened a little bit in one side of my screen so that I could take a look.
Yeah,
And
makes sense.
and I had like not, I don't have it here, but I had a notebook that I would use to take notes.
Were these notes, by the way, helpful? Like, did you still consult them, for example, later on?
Oh yes, definitely. I did. Those notes were certainly helpful because I would kind of consult them again to ask more questions. Sometimes I would, oh, you mentioned about the center. Can you clarify a little bit more about X, Y, Z? And I also got those notes and wrote on a document. So because in the end, those notes are also useful to sort of compare as well each school, because I did get competing offers. So it was good to see, okay, this is what I get from A, this is what I get from B. So I think the notes helped me a lot on that sense.
And did you also meet with students in any of the visits?
Yes, I did. And then, so basically it's interactions with the students, it's more informal, I would say, or at least that's how I approached it. So I asked more about the city. I asked about the stipend, if the stipend is livable, if they get health insurance. So I would ask more from the student perspective. Travel to conferences, how is the reimbursement process for them? And definitely things like where should I live in the city? What is the typical prices for rent? Things like that.
Mhm. And you also briefly already touched upon it, that typically during these visits you meet with the chair, and you already explained a bit about that, and also with the dean. So what kind of things do you usually talk about with the dean?
That's a good question. And I usually, when the interactions with the dean, I was really, really nervous. I was intimidated. So I think I asked the questions about more administrative. So I asked if they have any seed grant with college level. So if I could apply to any sort of seed grant in the college, if they are planning any sort of creating new programs or expanding the department or anything like that. What else? I think my questions were mostly on that direction. I would mostly let the dean talk. Most of the deans actually kind of start talking and giving an overview of the college and situating the college in terms of numbers, is how many students we have, this or budget and so on. So I'd let the dean talk as much as possible, and then I would ask a few questions here and there based on what the person talked and based on some questions that I had in advance. So I think overall the interactions were fine, I would say. And just to add a little bit, and then for the share, the interactions with the share, usually, at least for Notre Dame specifically, so I had my the first meeting I had on my job visit was with the chair, and the last meeting was with the chair again. And that last meeting was precisely when I told him, well, I have a competing offer, but I really want to come to Notre Dame. Just want to let you know that I have until day X to give an answer. So, and then to sort of a way to say when I would be able to hear back and where do I stand. That's when he said, well, we will have a next or meeting again next week. So it was still on time. And then by Thursday, we will let you know where do you stand. So that's at least based on what I heard is that the last meeting you have with the chair or the search committee chair or whatever, whoever it is, it's a good time for you to bring up this kind of situation that you have a competing offer, that you have a timeline. So that's pretty much what I did.
And like after all these meetings, did you also write any kind of thank you notes? And if yes, only to some persons or to all of them, or like how did you handle this?
That's a good question. So I come from a different culture and we don't write thank you notes. So I did not write thank you notes. Precisely because I did not knew that I was supposed to do it. So yes, I did not.
I see.
The only thing I've done was, I think for the first school that gave me the job offer, I did say thank you. Of course, I mean, when I declined the offer, I said, well, thank you so much. I'm declining the offer, not because the offer is not good, it's just because I found a better match. So try to decline the offer in a good tone, of course. And then for one of the schools specifically, as part of the offer, they would formally give me a mentor. So that would be a senior faculty in the department. So in that scenario as well, I also emailed that faculty specifically thanking her for agreeing to be my mentor. And she was also the chair of the search. I also thanked her for walking me through give me a tour of the building virtually. So I basically wrote a nice thank you note for her for that reason. But overall, I did not do a good job in writing thank you notes because I thought it was not necessary. I think maybe for a few of the phone interviews, I did write the thank you notes, but after the job talks, I was not really good at writing it, I think.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I guess it still worked out well, nevertheless.
Well, yes, it did, but it's something that would take maybe 1 minute of my time. I could have done it, but I just did not realize I should have done it. So it was a mistake I made.
Yeah, we talked now quite a bit about interviewing. So let's perhaps continue with hearing back and then also deciding. So, I mean, you already talked a bit about it. So how did you proceed after receiving your first offer? Did you, for example, reach out to other institutions, or what was your strategy there?
Yes. So when I received my first offer on the, so I'll backtrack a little bit just to give more context. My first job talk was on a Friday, and I received that offer for that on the Monday. And that Monday specifically, I was doing a job talk at another institution. So luckily, I received the phone call during my lunch break. And that's when the chair called me and told, well, you have a job. We want to make you a job offer and so on. And then I told him, well, right now I'm doing a job talk. So can we talk after 5 p.m. or something after my day was over? And then he said, okay, yes, so I can talk with you. And I kind of gave a hint that when should I reply, because I told him I'm still giving my job talks. The job talk I gave at your institution was my first job talk, so I still wanna at least give 2 more job talks just to have a comparison. So that was my approach. And then for the institution that I was giving the interview on that Monday, on the wrap-up meeting. So that was with one of the members of the search committee. I mentioned to him that I just received a call with an offer that I would have a short timeline to decide. And then for that reason, I think for that institution on Monday, I ended up having an offer from them, I think the following day or 2 days later, maybe. I think the next day I received an email from the chair, something along the lines, I want to like to talk with you to discuss parameters of the offer, things like that. And I think we had that discussion Wednesday or Thursday, something like that. So basically my strategy is that whenever I will have an offer that I was seriously considering, of course, I would mention to the next institution that I was giving the visit that I had that. But I did so in person, quotes, virtually instead of through email. Because luckily, though, the offers kind of happened right after the job talks. So I would take the chance to mention. So that was sort of my strategy. And then also it reached that point that the deadline is approaching, or I knew already that I would not be taking that offer for whatever reason, then I would call the person and say, thank you so much, but I would not be able to accept the offer at this moment for XYZ reason. So that was sort of my strategy, because I also wanted to be fair with the schools giving me the offer, such that I would give them a decline answer as early as possible so that they can move forward to the next candidate. So I was trying to balance my side, but also not kind of throw them under the bus, right? So that was my idea.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
And I guess on the, like for your first offer, how did this affect your interviewing experience at the institution on this day? I mean, this must have been like very exciting and at the same time also somewhat, affect the subsequent interviews, right?
I think it was good. I think in the sense that probably it might have boosted a little bit my confidence, because one thing that I have not mentioned, but I think the whole process was really stressful to me. And it really hurted my confidence, because as I mentioned before, I did had a very slow start in securing job talks. So at some point, I think January, February, I did feel that I don't think I will survive, and I don't think I'll get any job talk. I don't think I'll get any job offer whatsoever. So I was really freaked out. So having the fact that I had the job talk and I had an offer kind of boosted my confidence, in the sense that, well, I have an offer now. Even if I don't do well for any of my job talks, I don't receive an offer, I have something, right? And I really like the school that I interviewed with, right? So that's not like one offer that I was not really considering. No, I really like that school. So that helped a lot with my confidence, and then things going smoothly. Because that's one thing as well, is that because I was less nervous, because I felt, well, now I have something, I was not as nervous as before, and probably that helped me, right?
Right.
So that was good.
And in this process, did you, I assume, also ask for deadline extensions, perhaps even multiple times, right? Or
I did. I could not ask for 2 long extensions, but I think at least I asked for 1 week more extension for the first offer. And then for the second offer as well, I did ask for an extension. So that was, yeah, I did ask for a few extensions here and there, maybe for 1 week or a few days, precisely for that reason.
And how did you eventually converge towards a decision? So what were the factors that were relevant there?
So basically, I look at the combination of, first of all, the package. So basically, the salary, the startup package that was sort of have the more weight on my decision. And then the second variable would be location as well, because in the end of the day, I'll be living in that place for the next, probably the rest of my life. I will like the school. So I also need to take that into account. So these were the two biggest variables that I looked at, and also, and then the third would be match. Would with the research I do, will I be able to grow in there? Is there any enough support? Is there faculty there with which I could collaborate with? Things like that. And then given those parameters, that's where I decide, well, Notre Dame among all the three would be probably the one that scored the most across these metrics. So that's how I came about deciding. And then when I had competing offers, I would, well, if I knew already, well, more likely I'll take this one instead of this one, then I would go and decline the previous one so that I'm not holding people.
When you knew that you would accept an offer, did you do any negotiation, or even before that, did you negotiate any of the parameters?
Yes, for some of the offers I did negotiate. So I pushed a little bit salary, as well, resource package as well. I would ask more student years or travel money or equipment. So I would negotiate a few parameters. I'll try to be reasonable because I do not want to be way too out of the curve. But I did try to tailor a little bit here and there for some of the offers. Yes.
And what kind of strategy did you use? Did you, for example, use another offer to basically push basically another offer again, or?
Yes, so that's basically somewhat what happened is I would say, well, school A gave me this much on equipment, can you match? Or I would mention I got the salary at this institution is this much, would you be able to match? So that's basically what I tried to do.
And for the start date, did you want to start as early as possible? Did you, for example, consider doing a pre-medical where you would spend some time somewhere else?
Yeah, that's a good question. I never even thought that was a possibility. So I did not try to negotiate that because I thought that was not possible. I thought that once they open a position for fall, either you take or you don't take it. That's what I thought would happen. So I never saw that start date was negotiable. So I did not try, which is okay. I think I really wanted to start as soon as possible after my PhD. I was not really planning to do postdoc or do anything like that. So I figured I could start right away.
Yeah, great. I think it's time to slowly wrap up. And
Okay.
the first question that I had was what was the most surprising part about the whole process, or in general about your experience?
Surprising? I'm not so sure if there was anything surprising per se, because I think that was, and that's why I'm extremely grateful for the Slack channel that we had, and all the faculty who write blog posts about the journey on getting interviews and securing a job. So because I read so much of those interacting with other candidates, everything was not surprising because I would hear what happened to other people, so I knew, well, this might happen to me as well. So I don't think there was anything surprising on that respect. I think the questions were within what I was expecting and the interactions as well. So yeah, I think everything was fine, I would say.
What kind of role did your mentors play in the whole process?
So I mostly asked questions to my advisor, and even I was really shy to ask questions. I have this issue of I'm shy to ask for help. I'm this person, and I should not be. Um, but eventually, I would ask him some questions about mainly for the offers when I had competing offers. So I would ask him, well, I have a competing offer. What should I do? And he said, well, you need to ask for an extension. That's what you need to do. So I would ask him questions when I was freak out mode. I was like, I don't know what to do. What should I do? So that was sort of the role he had. I also asked him feedback for my job talk. I gave him the slides and I said, what do you think about the flow? I also showed him my research statement, teaching statement, diversity statement. So he skimmed through and gave feedback on little parts of the research statement that I did not include some of my work. So he said, well, you should include also XYZ that you have left out. So that was basically the role of my mentor. I would ask him a few questions, ask for feedback as well on my materials.
Did you make any kind of experiences that a male researcher perhaps wouldn't have made?
I'm not so sure. I don't think so. Yeah.
What kind of takeaways do you have from the interviewing season? Like, what kind of suggestions can you share with future faculty candidates?
Prepare, 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 prepare as much as possible. Without also hurting your research abilities, because it's one. I think my first suggestion is you need to keep in mind that during that period that you are interviewing, preparing for the job talks, preparing your materials, you won't be doing as much in terms of research. So keep that in mind. If you have bigger deadlines, start preparing early for the research or for the application materials. That's one thing. Another thing is I think it was really, really useful to have this sort of network of other candidates in the Slack channel. I also bought this book as well to kind of read because I did not know anything. I come from a different country, and the process to get jobs in there for academia is much different than it is in US. So talking with other people that is going through the same process or has already gone through this process is also extremely helpful. And then practice at home your job talk so that you can have a perfect timing. Not even if it is not perfect, but at least would finish around the range that is expected. Don't finish too early, but don't finish after. Like finishing early is not as bad, I think, as finishing overtime. So make sure at least you finish before the 1 hour limit. And if you're shy like me, at least I'm shy, I'm socially awkward. So prepare your questions in advance so you have your notes written. I think that's another challenge as well. If actually it played to my favor the fact that I've done the interviews virtually because I could have my notes on my screen and I could look at them without looking too awkward. Because if it was on a real situation, then I would have my notebook and I'll be looking at it. No, now I have another question. Wait, right. So that's so that kind of played on my favor. So what I want to say is that if you're socially awkward, if you're shy, just like me, having your questions memorized in advance that helps a lot because I'm really hard. At least I struggle a lot to keep a conversation going naturally. I'm not that kind of person that can just start a conversation, continue on that. So that's why I need to kind of create a checklist. So I need to talk about this right now. So that helps in that situation.
Yeah, that's all very relatable. So
yeah,
thank you so much, Trana, for sharing all this extremely valuable information. And yeah, it was great talking to you.
well, thank you so much, Manuel, for inviting me to this interview. It's really, really nice talking with you, and also really nice that you set up that website. I really appreciate that you've done that. That helped me a lot, and I wish the best as well for your next endeavors.